This is Ed Rep Radio, presented by Eastman Music Company. This is Ed Rep Radio, a podcast to bring you ideas and information from industry experts you can use on the road every day. Presented by Eastman Music Company, and I'm your host, Shane Duell. When looking around the industry at music stores that do step-ups at the highest levels, Amro Music is at the very top of that list. Over the years, many music stores have looked to Amro as a model for how to maximize your step-up business in the schools. Nick Averwater of Amro Music joins us today and graciously explains the process they use to move so many step-ups and how ed reps are at the forefront of their efforts. Why is there a 100-year-old recording of jazz piano playing right now? You'll see. There's a connection. Nick Averwater, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's so good to see you, and I'm honored to be on here, Ed Rep Radio. I've been listening to the first season for a while, and just excited to get and sit down with you, Shane. It's always good to see you, my friend.
It's going to be so good to hear from you. And, I have to say the Averwater family as a whole are just some of my favorite people. They really are. With Chip and your dad, Pat, and you and your cousin, CJ. I really enjoy seeing you guys at various industry functions.
Well, that's very generous, and we always enjoy the hang with you, Shane.
So one thing that I've seen presented by, speaking of the Averwater family, is what Amro Music does for step-ups. And it's been heralded really as a model for the industry because it's so successful. And I wanted to get you on here. And first of all, thank you so much for being so willing to share this. I think everyone listening is going to learn so much about what you do and how you do it. I wanted to have you talk about your system that you use for getting step-ups out into your market. But before I do, just like I do with every guest that comes onto Ed Rep Radio, I want to learn more about you and how you got to be where you are at Amro.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, man. I think I'm almost in year number 10 now. So I joined Amro Music full-time after graduating from the University of Tennessee. Of course, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate, anybody that's grown up in a family-owned business, it's that's got a little asterisk next to it because I remember sitting on a bar stool when I was 10, sticking barcode labels and punching saxophone, corks out of saxophones and doing things like that. So, very fortunate and privileged to have grown up in the business. But my time here at Amro Music full-time is going right on 10 years. And now predominantly what I do is I work with our Ed Rep team. I hate to use the word manage because we have such an incredible group of people. They really don't need management. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they just need answers to questions or resolutions to problems. Sure. And so that's really what I see my job here is just to be sure our Ed Rep team has the tools that they need to be successful.
Okay, great. And Amro Music is such a well-known name in the music industry. Can you tell me a bit about the store, who started it and how long it's been there, and a little bit about the market you serve?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're very fortunate. Last year marked our 100-year anniversary.
Wow.
And just a tremendous reflection of the team that we have had here over the decades and the generations. So my great-grandfather started the company in 1921. He was seeking his fame and fortune in Los Angeles, going out to LA, stopped in Memphis, and decided to open a teaching studio. And he was one of the first instructors of jazz music in the 1920s. Now, of course, 1920s jazz is pretty cutting edge. This is the big thing. So he wrote a method book and would actually open his window on Main Street in downtown Memphis, open his window, play as loud as he could, and try to attract people in and give them lessons on the piano. So over the years, the company kind of evolved. He moved locations. Sometimes forcefully moved locations, which we now call it being evicted through, the 1930s and 40s through the Great Depression, survived all of that, began offering pianos to customers and then eventually moving into band, orchestra, instrumentation, things like that. And the company has just kind of evolved over the years, but we feel like at the root is our focus on the educator, serving the needs of music educators, because that's what my great-grandfather was, a music educator. And so we try to take that very seriously now in the service offerings we have. So, that's who we are. The areas that we serve is, so we're based in Memphis, Tennessee. We're a single location, still family owned and operated. It's my cousin CJ and I who are generation number 4. And we predominantly serve the rural farming communities that surround Memphis.
Hmm.
Everybody knows Memphis. Oh, that's a big metropolitan area. But like a lot of metropolitan areas, they have their own repair shop and they own something like 98,000 instruments in Shelby County. So,
Wow.
most of what we do is calling on these farming and rural communities. And I say that because as we talk about step ups, that's really influenced the service model, and why we got into step ups is the types of communities that we serve. So I'll come back to that point, but just wanted to point it out.
Hmm.
The outside of Memphis, it's a lot of small farming towns. The next largest cities are places like Tupelo, Mississippi, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Jackson, Tennessee, and then just a lot of the small rural communities around there.
Okay. Okay. It sounds
Yeah,
like you're in the music store now. I can hear a saxophone
I
in the
am.
background.
So there's a saxophone being play tested right next to my wall. So I'm next to the repair shop. So your listeners will know that sound well.
Definitely. I was going to say, is that a step up being tried out right now?
I hope so. That would make me happy.
Excellent. So I'd like to get into your focus on step ups because not every store focuses as much as you do on getting step ups out there into the market. So I'll start with a question of why. Why do
Yeah.
you work so hard on the step up category?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think that kind of goes back to the markets that we serve that I was talking about earlier. We know that there's a certain level of service that educators expect of the retailer, right? And there's an economic component associated with that level of service that educators expect. We drive something like 7,500 miles every single week
Mm,
at Amro Music with our ed reps. There's a very real dollar amount associated with just that level of driving,
right.
let alone the person behind the wheel and all of the associated expenses. So, because we're in these small farming communities, these small rural communities, really my dad recognized the need that, hey, if we're only going to be able to rent 8 or 10 instruments in this school, which is very common, we have reps whose average rentals per school range from 12 to 18 units. So we have
Mm,
reps that call on their whole territory ranges from 12 to 18. And as we all know, if you throw out an outlier at the top, that number really comes down pretty quickly.
hmm
So we call, again, it's just these small towns. So Pat recognized this need from an economic standpoint to increase our revenue per school. And so that's one of the reasons that the step up model came into play, is it was an opportunity for us to increase that revenue model, or that revenue per school, that allowed us to provide the services. It fulfilled the economic needs that we needed to provide the services that the educators expected of Amro. So that's really Amro's why behind that. And then we
mm,
also recognize that for school programs, they have a need in the step up program too, right? Directors want better retention. Well, we know students that rent and then step up are more likely to join the high school band. They have higher retention, so we can help them check that box. We know educators want high quality instruments. They want wooden clarinets, open hole flute, F attachment trombones. And so when we have that path that provides them that opportunity to meet their needs while also helping us to achieve the economic realities of calling on these communities. So, if all those are a circle, the overlap is right there in the step up program.
It sounds like a perfect example of a mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So the teacher's perspective is something I'm also interested in. What do they see in their programs, and what do they describe it to you like when they see more step ups out there in their bands and in their orchestras?
Yeah. Again, I mean, they have objectives that they're trying to achieve within their program. And I think the sizable majority of educators out there recognize that, frankly, higher quality instruments tend to produce a higher quality sound. And so I think that is something that's really important for us when we're on the retail perspective. We're dealing with people who, for all intents and purposes, are not living in the world that we live in. So we really can't go to them and talk about the economics
Mm,
of stepping up. That tends to fall on deaf ears, or even worse, some people may be repulsed by that conversation.
hmm
So, we found much greater success putting that conversation into the band directors or the orchestra teachers' accomplishments. How can we help you achieve your goal of having higher quality instruments, having more consistency in the brands that you have in your program? having a better tone quality, particularly with your advanced ensembles, trying to put that in their why and slowly getting buy-in from that.
Do you have a pretty good success rate with teachers wanting to go through this program that we'll explain in a little bit here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, of course, one of the things that we benefit from now at this point is momentum, right? I mean, we've been doing this for 35 years, so
Mm.
people know, and it's almost funny. We have now a lot of music educators who are graduating who got their step up from
Oh,
Amro Music,
right.
and so it's become kind of this second generational thing. But obviously, it wasn't always like that. And you just have to focus on the educators that are excited about it, that do want to do it. Put all of your emphasis on that. Even for us today, after 35 years, there's educators that don't embrace it and they really
Mm.
don't want to participate in it. That's okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there because frankly, I'm going to spend my time, the 80-20 rule, spend 80% of your time on the 20% of the people that are really excited about it, because we'll talk about the impact the educator can make. But I got to tell you, it's not one or two horns. It's like 10 or 20 horns. Like, it's
Hmm.
significant. Right. And so you get exponentially better results emphasizing and working with those educators that are excited about the program, as opposed to trying to convert the ones that are not.
Yeah. What do you think those teachers have in common? The ones that are really into this program, the ones that really want their students to have step ups. What do they have in
Yeah.
common?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I see is the first is the educator. There's a certain level of sales that the educator takes on, and I won't use the word salesman or saleswoman, but I will say that the educator is comfortable casting their vision and then articulating that to the parents. So
Mm.
we want the band or the orchestra to be as good as it can be. Part of that is the instrumentation, and our expectation is that your child has a high quality instrument to be in our advanced ensembles.
Hmm.
When an educator says that, the kids fall in line, the parents fall in line. Okay, now I see the vision. This is an expectation. And if we're honest with ourselves, that's not unique to music. I mean, all activities do this, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right.
if you want to play baseball, you got to go get a bat and a glove, right? Like, this is not unique to music. But the educators that we see that have the most successful meetings are the ones that are comfortable articulating the importance of that to the parents.
That makes a lot of sense. What about the other side? The other end of the perspective where they don't want to do it. What do those teachers have in common?
That one's a little more challenging to me, because I think there's a number of speed bumps that an educator might have before embracing the program. One of the ones that we see most frequently is the educator feels the need to predetermine the economic capabilities of their parents on their behalf. Right?
Hmm.
They will that you'll hear comments like, "My parents could never afford that." Well, maybe some can't, but maybe some can. And, why don't we just simply present it as an option to the parent and let them decide if it's the right, need for their child? Let's let them decide. So
Hmm.
obviously that's a hesitancy that we see a lot of times, is somebody just feels the need to perhaps predetermine their parents' economic abilities.
Hmm.
That's probably the most frequent one that we see. One of the other speed bumps is kind of the pendulum swings all the other way, and the educator wants really, really high level instruments. And that can create a tremendous roadblock as well for the parents, because there is an economic reality. I don't mean to be insensitive, but you've got to find that sweet spot
Hmm.
between, what the community can afford and what's the best, need to meet the program's expectations. We've got to find that middle ground there. So those are some of the hesitancies. I always get a little nervous when you sit down and talk with a young educator, and you start talking about brands, and they'd say, some high level boutique, Edwards trombones. Okay, well, I know you played on an Edwards trombone, but your eighth grader doesn't need a custom level trombone. Let's talk about what's available to your parents. Let me show you this Eastman Bravo. It's a great horn. And
Hmm.
so the pendulum can swing in both directions, and you've got to work with the educator to find that middle ground.
Yeah, I would imagine that your ed reps have to get to be pretty adept at tactfully explaining these things to teachers, the reality of
Yeah.
what things cost these days.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what an educational rep has to be equipped to do, is have those conversations, kind of guide them to the end zone, and still be great friends with the educator at the end of that conversation. That's
Right.
right. That's what we do for our living.
Yeah. Educating the educator can be a little tricky sometimes.
Yeah. Again, there's an economic component to this. We shouldn't hide from it. It's reality, but we have to be very delicate in how we handle those conversations.
Yeah, yeah. So let's dig into the actual, I guess, system that you use to get these step ups out into the market. And I guess first I'll ask, do these typically, these transactions, do they happen in the store or do they happen out into this in the schools?
Yeah, for us, again, because of the areas that we serve, the sizable majority happens in the schools because it's not unusual for us to have a meeting that's, 2 or 3 hours away from Memphis.
Hmm.
And so for us, our model is kind of built around the in school um, ability to do these meetings, but that's certainly not the only way. We do have events in the store, and I know there's some retailers that do this far, far better than we do. One of them being, your former employer there at Summer Hayes Music,
Right,
a wonderful
right.
company. They do this as well as anybody in the industry. But because of the distance and the geography that we serve, that's just the way we have had to build them.
Speaking of summer haze, one of the reasons that we had to do it that way in the store is we didn't have permission or access to do it in the school districts. There was pretty much a policy that said no transactions in or contracts can be signed on school property. So that's where we had to kind of focus on, well, what can we do? How do we get
Yeah.
people into the store? So it sounds like you don't have that issue. It sounds like you can go out into the schools and do these transactions just fine.
Yeah, yeah. On the other side of that issue is trying to have a successful meeting 3 hours away outside your store. That creates a
Mm,
new level of logistical challenges equipping your rep with the tools, the resources, the answers, the inventory that they need to accurately and efficiently service a meeting with people that you're not in the store. You don't have the convenience of the selection. So,
right.
you solve some problems and create others along the way.
Okay. So let's look at the ed rep's role in setting up these events out into the school. What's the process that an ed rep would go through to get this on the books, get this on the calendar, and then make this event happen?
Yeah. Well, perhaps we should probably talk about this in the idea of a young educator, if that's okay, Shane, because
Sure.
experienced educators in our area, they've heard the pitch, they kind of know the angle that we're coming at. But again, I think with that young educator, it comes back to helping understand what their goals are for the program, right? And particularly young educators. I mean, I do think there's a competitive desire in all of this. I mean, a lot of these young folks are coming out of DCI and the drum and bugle corps and marching bands in college and things like that. And so kind of finding those commonalities and unpacking what their objectives for the program are, and then looking for ways to tactfully tie it back to your ability to solve those problems through a step up program,
Hmm.
I think is a great way to go about that.
Okay.
Um, because it's going to be different for each educator, and you don't want to do a sales pitch on the program, right? I mean, you want to solve their problems with the program. That's what we're after in all of this. So from there it's just kind of a matter of logistics of talking through inventory, ensuring that they're equipped to talk to the students, answer questions from the parents, and then being present to hopefully do those conversions with the parents the night of the meeting.
Okay. I'd like to go back to that conversation, that initial conversation where that young teacher you mentioned, and
Yeah.
they're maybe first year teacher, or they
Right.
have not done this with your store before.
Yeah.
How does that conversation go from an ed rep to that teacher? How do they kind of bring them on to this idea and get them excited about it?
Yeah. Well, again, I do think we're the beneficiary of momentum, and that a lot of people they know about our step up program, and a lot of them are like the idea. They're attracted to the idea of the step
Hmm.
up program. But again, I think once you unpack their problems, then that's going to allow you to begin to solve them. And I'm not meaning to be vague on this question. Because I think if you just ask enough questions and ask the right questions, the educator will eventually lead you to that
Hmm.
opportunity to
Hmm.
bring it up. And as any of your listeners know, that relationship with the director is so important. I mean, I'm a big believer that we have to be their friend, we have to be their problem solver, we have to be their hero before they start to worry about what's important to us,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That we have to show our weight, that we're able to help them be more than just a read delivery person,
So
and
true.
once we're able to do that, then we can start to unpack the step up program to prepare them and to start walking through all of that stuff together. So, this is not a conversation that you can have in between bells over 6 minutes with kids coming in and out. I mean, this is
Hmm.
hey, can I meet you after school? Can we sit down and, can we meet for coffee? This is
Mm.
when's your planning period? This is a little bit
Okay.
meatier conversation. So there needs to be some intentionality behind it, particularly for those first year educators.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that being more of a lengthy conversation. I'm wondering, with all of the teachers that do this already, do you, I guess, drop names with those younger teachers and say, so and so, who's a respected teacher in your area, he does this and loves it, been doing it for years. Do you have that kind of conversation?
Typically not,
Mm,
typically not. Usually we'll do that when it comes to start talking about brands, makes, and models,
okay.
especially with those young educators. That's where we typically come in and say, well, hey, this is what the school that's down the road and is very successful uses. And we can use that. And we can talk about inventory strategies a little bit too
Hmm.
later in the conversation. That's usually where that comes in. If an educator is reluctant the first year, I tend to kind of not worry too much about it and keep trying to prove myself. The second year, if they're reluctant, then that's usually where I really make an intentional uh, opportunity. I really try to find an opportunity to strengthen that relationship and then begin to bridge the gap to the economics. And sometimes that's enough to kind of say, okay, I do need to do, eventually we will have an economic driven conversation, usually not out of the gate.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's probably, to be honest, Shane, like 90% of the people are on board with it because we're putting it in terms of what's important to them. Very rarely do we have to circle back around and come back to the economic component. We more use the economic component with the experienced educators because they already know their why. And it's just kind of a reminder or revitalization that, hey, these meetings are important to me. They are important to the store. And ultimately, this is what allows us to provide the services that your program needs to flourish. Usually that's all we have to say. And they'll say, okay, I got it.
Yeah, all right. They're in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Is there a certain time of year you find that these just work better for your typical school program?
It varies. We do ours in the spring just because it's not rental season, right?
Right. Right.
And so it gives us a little bit more time to do that.
You don't do them at the
There,
same time?
nope, no, we don't do them at the same time. We got plenty to do in the fall.
Right.
So we do ours in the spring. It's just the way our schedule lays out. I know there's other stores in our industry that do it around Christmas, which is obviously a great time. Late winter, try to put some instruments under the tree. There's a lot of I think benefit to that too. So I think the time of year that you do it, the only time that I don't recommend doing them is May. I think within 3 to 4 weeks of school getting out, parents mentally start checking out and, hey, that's next year's problem. I'll
Right.
take care of that next year. Right now, I'm trying to get to the end zone, get through exams, get our summer vacations booked. So that's about the only time that we say, hey, let's not do those in May, because I think there's just a mental thing that happens as a school year with both educators, students, and parents.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
So how about grade level? Do you find there's a certain range of grades that is kind of the sweet spot?
We tend to be a little bit on the earlier side of things. And again, I'm not really sure that there's a right or a wrong answer on some of this. When we've talked with people in the industry, a lot of people get hung up on some of the logistical questions. What grade do you do it? How many months of rental credit do you give? What time of year? And, I think if we look across our industry, there's people that have varying answers to all of these questions, and they all do their meetings really, really well.
Hmm.
Right. So I think if there's somebody that's listening and they're thinking about doing a step up program in their area, I would be much more interested in trying to find something that meets the needs of the educators, structuring it around that, perhaps looking at competitive advantages that you might have in your current marketplace by structuring your step up program a certain way, and then keeping it simple. I
Mm.
think sometimes we get really confusing, particularly with rental credit, and it makes it really hard for parents to understand. And so just finding a time of year that works for your company and your educators, and just keeping kind of the details as simple as you can, because it's easier to communicate to the educator and easier to communicate to the parent when it is time to step up. So
So true.
ours is spring, but I'm not going to advocate that that's right or wrong. It just is at Amro Music.
Okay. And it works for you, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. It works for us.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you have a appointment set up in the spring with a teacher. The teacher's on board. Your ed rep's going to go out into the school at a certain time. Is this a evening thing, I assume?
Yeah, yeah. The most popular time for us is like 3:30 to 5:30. You kind of hit
Oh, okay.
the after school parents and the after work parents. So that tends to be the most convenient time, or when we have found the best attendance.
Okay. And when the parents show up, do they have an appointment set up, or is it kind of a free for all? Show up and we'll help you.
It is thanks. It used to be the free for all that you described, thanks to kind of COVID and the need to socially distance, and everybody's, I think, increased level with like these form
Mm.
generators, Google Forms, and things like that. We see more and more educators go into kind of a sign up sheet so they can monitor it, so they can handle it. But for the most part, it's somewhere in between now. Today for our educators. But if you come to the meeting and you don't have an appointment, we'll figure out how to get you in. We'll
I'm
take care of
sure.
you. Yeah. Come on down. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a couple hours long, it sounds like.
Yeah, most of the time. And we try to block, 10 to 15 minutes with each parent, the opportunity
Okay.
to sit down and talk with them a little bit, fill out the paperwork, and then hopefully swap out instruments.
Are these kind of predetermined instruments that the students will be switching to, or are they trying a couple right there in the appointment or the
No,
evening?
no. And I do think this is one of the areas that we perhaps differ than some of the other retailers. I mentioned about the logistical challenges of the distances that we serve. And one of the ways that we have to do that efficiently is we have to have a very streamlined set of inventory that we send out to a school,
Hmm.
right? So we tend to have like a band director's preference. 5 flute, clarinet, trumpet, trombone, saxophone, and then we might have like a used or a more economical version or option for the parents that we'll kind of keep under the table.
Okay.
But I do think this is one of those areas where more is not better. Buying an instrument can be really confusing to parents, and it can be really, really overwhelming.
Hmm.
And I think when you go in there with, hey, here's 3 or 4 options, and we're so excited to show all these, and let's have you play the instrument. A, we've got a staff. B, we've got to bring all that inventory. But what's the most likely response we're going to get from that parent? Let me
Probably
th-
confusion and overwhelming.
let me think about it,
Oh,
because they're
yeah,
confused and
yeah,
overwhelmed. That's
yep,
exactly right. They're feeling confused and overwhelmed, and so their response is let me think about it.
yeah.
We go in with a little bit more streamlined model. Hey, you play flute. This is the flute your band director picked out for you. Let's
Hmm.
talk about it. And 90% of the parents, they say, okay, if that's the one my child's, educator wants me to have, that's the one I'll get. And that's the end of the conversation.
Hmm. Do they not even have to play it, or feel like they have to play it to approve it at that evening? Do they
Um,
just take it
we
and go?
we do circulate demos through the classroom and talk to the students. And so hopefully by now the kids have had the opportunity in class to perform on the instrument, put their hands on it, feel the difference. That's a big part of it too. Yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting topic. Leading up to this evening, it sounds like the students have already tried these instruments in rehearsal, in class. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll take you through some of our strategy. I'm not going to go too nitty gritty on this, because obviously this is some stuff that we hold close to the chest. But,
Sure.
I'll kind of do the 30,000 square foot, because this really is what directs our actions when we get down on the ground. As retailers, I think one of the things that we get really excited to talk about is price, right? On
Mm.
sale, rental credit. All these things. We get really excited to talk about these things. And that's what most retailers talk about. We're not selling what most retailers are selling. We're selling something that a lot of parents don't know about:
Mm.
musical
Hmm.
instruments.
Right.
So, our goal is that when a parent shows up to the step up meeting, we have articulated what a step up instrument is and why it's important for the child. Those two things, those are the only two things that we want to articulate prior to the meeting. At the meeting, we talk about how much it costs, right?
Hmm.
And so that kind of drives all of our marketing, all of our outreach, everything that we do, what a step up instrument is, why it's important. That's the goal of preparing for the meeting. The third thing, how much it costs, that's what we talk about at the meeting. And so I think when we kind of run it through that filter, it gives us a great deal of clarity. Hey, what's the objective of our marketing pieces? What's the objective of speaking to the students, of leaving loaners? And what are signs that it's working? When I know our marketing is working when a parent walks in and they say, "Oh, I know what a step up is. I'm just here to talk about price." I'm like, "Okay, good. It's working." So for us, I think once you run things through that filter, it gives you just a greater deal of clarity about when to talk about the right things.
Okay. So you're really pushing the why and the what.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the why is your child is outgrowing their beginner instrument, right? And the what is this is a more advanced instrument that will allow your child to continue to develop. That concept is so easy for all of us, but for parents, if you don't play a musical instrument, then they all must be the same, right?
Hmm.
If you're not a clarinet player or something like that, you just say, "Hey, man, a trumpet is a trumpet is a trumpet." Well, that's not entirely the case. We all know that to be true, but parents don't know that. So, we've got to be prepared to talk about, what a step up is. It's a higher quality instrument made of higher quality materials that'll help your child to continue advance, play faster, play with better tone quality, do all of these things. And so when you can talk about the what and the why, the how much gets a lot easier. The other thing too is if you talk about the how much before you've talked about the what and the why, a lot of parents are going to be sticker shocked,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, they're going to come in and they're going to go, "Oh my gosh, $2,000 for a wood clarinet. I didn't know we were spending that kind of money today." So you've got
Yeah.
to articulate the what and the why in advance of the how much, or a lot of parents are going to be confused and stunned by the price.
Okay. So let's go there. Let's go to when you have that conversation with parents about price. Is that a tough one or do they come in kind of having a general understanding of what they're getting into?
If we've done a great job marketing with the what and the why, the how much is a lot easier,
Hmm.
because they know that there's difference variations in quality musical instruments, that it's an important part of their child's progression, that they're made of higher quality materials, and so that kind of does ease the burden a little bit. And then that's where the rubber meets the road, and you've got to find a program that is economically feasible for the parents and the communities that you're serving. And there's so many factors. I mean, we can come back to the rental credit. How much did they accumulate? What's the retail price of the instrument? Are you able to break it down into payments? I mean, there's new or used. There's a multitude of variables that can impact all of that
Mm,
you have to be in tune with. Or if you do overshoot, you're not going to sell any instruments that night.
sure. Right. Right. Hopefully this is an okay place to go in this conversation. When you set up your financing for the parents, do you sell them that night, or does it tend to be a rent kind of situation where they're renting it, or is there something else like financing?
Yeah, so ours are written on installments. Doesn't mean that's the perfect way to do it. We know a lot of other friends in the industry that do, rent to own or rentals of advanced or step up instruments. Ours happen to be on installments, and we do that, frankly, at the educator's request
Hmm.
because it helps to increase that retention, right?
Hmm.
We're very upfront about the installment component of this. Doesn't have the return option, but because we do step up at the end of the sixth grade year, and most parents opt to do a 3-year installment agreement with us,
Hmm.
we get the two most likely times of year that kids are going to drop out of band, and that's the end of their first year and going into high school band. Well, our
Hmm.
36-month installment agreements straddle those two areas, and it increases the retention.
That is very interesting, and teachers recognize this.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
good
Again,
point.
it's those circles that we're trying to line out. Here's where our circles meet. Let's talk about how we can help each other accomplish our goals.
Yeah, yeah, I could see teachers, the light going on for some of them when they realize that the
Yeah.
retention is going up. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and to add a caveat, I mean, if I walk into a band room and the band director says, "You're going to take this flute back because this kid's a little terror in my classroom," I'm going to take that flute back. I'm not going to go, "Well, hey, look, man, they still hadn't signed it." And absolutely, if we have to do it at the request of the educator, we can fix all of that. So
Yeah, yeah.
that comes with a caveat. If it prevents us from serving that program to the best of our abilities, we will undo it.
Sure, that makes sense. So back to the logistics of the actual meeting after
Mhm.
school. 3:30 to 5:30 sounds like. How many staff members are required in your average evening?
We do one at probably 95%, and that's the ed rep.
Okay. So the ed rep has a big role in this.
Yeah.
Does it ever get to the point where you have to just have more from the store to come support the size of the event?
I would love to have some more accounts where that's a problem, Shane. I'm gonna be honest with you. That doesn't tend to be a problem quite as much as we would like for it to be. Occasionally, the ed rep might opt to divide the meeting, like brass one night and woodwind the other, or they'll simply say, "Hey, we're
Mm,
taking appointments on Tuesday and
yeah.
Thursday." But no, for the most part, the ed rep does all of that. And but hey, like I said, if you know any accounts in your area or in our area that want to talk to us, we'll chat about that.
All right. So it doesn't sound like it takes a huge amount of personnel other than, ed reps that are already there. I'm curious, do the ed reps have to alter their schedule much? Sometimes talking to ed reps, if you bring up anything that will throw off their daily and weekly route, you see them get very nervous. Like, well, what about going here at 10 o'clock? I have to go there. Does it throw off their schedule at all doing this system?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because although the meeting starts at 3:30, I mean, the reality is that you probably want to be in that parking lot by 2, right? Because as any ed rep will tell you, after school is a terrible time
Yeah.
to try to cross campus and
Right.
unload inventory and put up with buses and car lines. So yeah, I mean, you wanna be there at the right time, and you'll always have some parents that walk in. If the meeting starts at 3:30, you'll have a parent that walks in at 3:10 and says, "Hey, we've got soccer practice. Can I do it
Mm-hmm.
now?" And so we try to be set up and ready, 30 minutes before the meeting is scheduled to start, to the best of our ability.
I would imagine that you've been doing this system for so long, your teachers are used to it, and your ed reps are used to it, with the fact that it's going to take some time out of your quote normal schedule. What about with some of those younger teachers, or maybe even younger ed reps who, you know, they they're used to the schedule and they're afraid to alter their route? Is there a way to kind of explain it to ed reps and explain it to the teachers that this is a good thing to alter your schedule for this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to a certain extent, educators recognize that you have to invest more time at certain times of year. Like when I go and recruit at a school, like that alters my schedule, right? Like I'm supposed to be there.
Right.
There's an assembly at 10:30, and I've got to go in there and recruit. So I think there are some ways to alleviate that. Number one, communicate in advance. And number
Mm,
two, just ensure that the educators know that the same service that I'm providing them, that's an inconvenience to you today, I'm willing to provide to you tomorrow. Hey, if you want me to do a step up meeting, I'll be there when it's your time. If you want me to recruit, I'll be there at your time.
mm.
So, yeah, I do think, that is something we have to be cognizant of to be sure that nobody gets left out on an island and doesn't get the service that they need. But fortunately, our reps are pretty experienced and they do a wonderful job handling that and know how to communicate all of that in advance with the educator.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Do you ever require some sort of a backup person for when an ed rep is maybe not running their normal route? Is there a backup person to help take care of these little things that may be required while the rep is preoccupied doing this other thing?
No, not really. I mean, again, I think with communication, most of this stuff takes care of itself. One of our ed reps, one of the things that he does that I think works really well is every Sunday night he sends out his weekly schedule
Hmm.
to all of his accounts. He's got a whole mailing list for all of his
Wow.
accounts, and he says, "Hey, here's my schedule." It's just an Excel spreadsheet, and he's got columns for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and 8:15, 8:30, going down column A there, and he sends out a schedule. And so you can open it up and see, okay, he's recruiting here this day and he'll be at my school this day. And
Hmm.
That seems to work really well for him.
Yeah.
And I think as long as people know when to expect you, yeah, I don't know. I know there's varying degrees of opinions on this. There are music stores out there that they will not change the schedule for these things. I get it, but my opinion is it might be a little unnecessary or overkill.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
it
my
sounds.
opinion. I could be wrong.
I personally, I was in the same boat as you. There's some important things that you can do as an ed rep to help, like recruiting and these step up events. And teachers, it seems like as long as you manage their expectations and you communicate well, like you said, they're totally fine with it. And it's
Yeah.
so worth it for the store to do it.
Yeah, and I think the root cause, and it might be something worth unpacking, and this is a whole nother conversation, but um, that might be a sign that you're just a delivery person.
Mm,
If you are absolutely attached to that particular time and won't come off of it, and you're not able to also go do things like recruiting and step up meetings and things like that, there might be a little bit of a sign there that educators are not getting the full services that somebody might be able to invest. So I'd even
mm.
be a little bit cautious of that mentality.
That's an excellent point. And you're right. That should be another episode of Ed Rep Radio on that topic right there. What are you
But I
doing?
think
What are you doing
there
tomorrow, Nick?
that's right. There are listeners, and I'm sure I just fired. So I'm gonna get some emails on that one. But I don't know. Such is life.
Yeah, it's true stuff though. So back to the logistics of this meeting. The instruments that are there, they're predetermined. I'm wondering who kind of drives what's going to be there. Does that come from the store and items that you would prefer to have out there, or is this kind of pushed by the teacher?
No, it's definitely a mutual conversation had between our ed rep and the teacher. Teachers are going to have opinions on brands, and our job is to serve that need, right? And what you definitely don't want to do is, if they're excited about a brand, not offer it, because that could have
Mm,
been the driving force behind their reason to get in on the step ups anyway.
yeah.
But I do think you've got to be prepared to guide that conversation, particularly with young educators. One of the things that would always make me cringe is we would sit down to talk about brands, and they would say, I don't know, let me talk to my college roommate. He played tuba, or he played trumpet, or he played trombone. And they would come back from this studio setup of, this really unusual hand selected trumpet out of Chicago with a reverse lead left hand and all this weird stuff. And you're like, okay, yeah, I know, but we got to talk about what your eighth graders need. So
Right.
I do like to kind of steer the conversation, but kind of give them some either good, better, best, or an either or. And if that all fails, then you just kind of go back to hey, this is what they're using down the street. Why don't we try it this year? And if it doesn't work, we'll fix it. We'll evaluate it next year. Kind of go from there. So, you do want to be prepared. I never like to just walk in and say, hey, what trumpet do you want? That's a loaded question, and
Right.
you could get a really odd response with that. But I like to come in and say, "Hey, we've got some options this year. I've got an option A or an option B, and hey, option C is new, and if you want to check it out, I can bring it."
Okay.
Kind of guiding the conversation in that way.
Yeah. Do private teachers ever kind of get in there and alter that band director's mind? Do you see any influence from private teachers?
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly in these schools that have really robust private teacher studios working alongside the educator, where kids are perhaps taking private lessons after school or as part of their curriculum. Yeah, you definitely have to have the buy-in of that private instructor,
Hmm.
and so that is something that and a lot of times those directors will, if you're an educator that played trumpet and you have a flute private instructor, a lot of times we will see them defer that conversation to the flute instructor or
Hmm.
to the private teacher. So yeah, that's absolutely a key in all of this that need to be mindful of.
Yeah, we've heard that mentioned many times on this podcast that band directors often look to private teachers for what they'll recommend. So yeah, don't skip that side of the conversation. They're such a key influencer.
Yeah, they are.
So there must be a lot of logistics behind the scenes. There's the evening that happens, but just to get to that point with all the instruments, and I'm assuming some sort of computer with financing on the computer, all of those various things that have to be set up ahead of time. What are some of the things that if someone's listening right now and thinking, yes, I want to do this, sounds great. What tips do you have for the logistics side of it?
Yeah, the logistics side of it. I think one of the things that reps that do this most successfully is they find little things to constantly bring the topic of step ups to the educator,
Hmm.
right? So if they'll set a date for a step up meeting and it's 6 weeks in advance, 1 week they might just bring posters to them, something really simple. The next week, they might go as far as to say, hey, we're still good for the meeting. Okay, perfect. Hey, do you mind if I write that date and time on your board for your students to see? That's also a reminder for the educator too. So they try to have something each week. It doesn't have to be heavy or
Hmm.
significant, or it's just something that kind of brings the conversation back around to the upcoming step up meeting to prepare the educator, ensure it stays top of mind, things like that. So that's it from the logistics. From the other side of this, and if we can talk, I know this is EdRep Radio, but if we can just talk the owner's perspective, is that
Sure.
okay, Shane?
I
Yeah.
think there's a few owners who listen too.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're thinking about doing this, it's something that you have to be really cognizant of. And we were talking a little bit about this before we hit record. Step up programs can consume a tremendous amount of cash
Hmm.
and capital on your business because you're having to buy all this inventory. You may or may not decide to loan it out in advance. There's a depreciation component. There's a make ready when all of it comes back. You're buying all this inventory. You perhaps are financing it on your own paper, or you're using a third-party financing source. Doesn't really matter. But the point is that in almost all of these scenarios, the cash that you pay out is usually well in advance of the cash that you bring in off
Mm-hmm.
of this. And so I think from the owner's perspective or the manager's perspective, you've just got to be very, very cognizant of that component of a step up program, of growing your step up program, because it'll do really funny things to your checking account if you're not careful.
I imagine. I imagine.
Yeah.
And from a buying and ordering perspective, I suppose you have to be really thinking way ahead. If
Yeah.
you have this many step ups going out there into your market, that's pretty big volume.
Yeah.
Imagine you have to think, how far ahead do you start planning your inventory?
Uh, in a non-COVID year,
Yeah, in a non-COVID year.
I like to have the inventory on our shelf and ready to go 90 days before our step up meetings start. In a COVID year,
Hmm.
I'm finding myself placing orders for product that I'm hoping to need in 12 or 14 months. So yeah, I mean, there's a very real reality to all of this, that you've got to have the capital or the line of credit or access to capital that you need to make the investment to get into this world.
Yeah, sure. But you find it pays off in the end?
Yeah, I mean, after 100 years, we're still hanging out. So
Good
we'd
point.
like to
Yeah,
think
it
it's
worked out
working.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, any other tips or advice? Just kind of leaving it open for ed reps that you want to throw out there.
I would come back to the understanding the why. I think always when you're able to relate it to the why, things go a lot easier. And again, just to keep it simple, I see just a lot of when we do interact and people call us and say, hey, tell us about this. And this is what we're doing, and we can't figure out why we can't get traction. The most common thing that I come back to is that this is just too complicated.
Hmm.
Typically, you've either got too many instruments that you're out showing, and that consumes a lot of capital and a lot of personnel expense, or just the idea of stepping up is too confusing to the parents. And usually it comes down to the rental credit. Well, you get 100% for the first 12 months. And then after that, it becomes 70% from months 12 to, 18. And then after that, it becomes a sliding scale that they try to create of rental credit.
Hmm.
Gets super confusing. So, that would be my two suggestions, that when we do interact with people and they're asking us questions about getting their program going, is understand the why and just keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
We're selling trumpets here, not building rockets. So let's just keep it simple.
Right, right. I think a perspective that's so important to remember is the parent's perspective. Now that I am a parent, it's interesting. In my son's a fourth grade student, plays cello. It's really interesting from my perspective now, looking as a parent. Things can get really complicated, and if they are, you just like, I can't read this right now. I'm too busy. No way. I'm just not doing this. It's a different perspective that I think everyone needs to remember and put that filter on and look at your program that way
Yeah.
and see if a parent can get it. Maybe even show a parent who isn't in your industry and
Yeah.
get some interesting feedback.
Yeah, that's right. Because, for us, the majority of our customer base are soccer moms in between practices, running into the meeting and having to get home and do all of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's our target audience for the majority of the step up meetings, is the busy mom with a narrow window and a lot of things on her mind. We've got to be able to articulate the what, the why, and the how much within the window that we have, and in a way that she can then go home and explain to her husband.
Makes sense. Yeah. One of my favorite sayings I've seen recently on LinkedIn, and I'm going to do my best to say it accurately. The best salespeople don't think like salespeople. They think like customers.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, Nick, I cannot thank you enough for being so open and sharing what you do there at Amro in the world of step ups. And, I've seen some other stores around the country jump on board with the system. And for those who, like you said, keep it simple, it works so beautifully well. And I highly encourage everyone to give it a shot.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shane. And before we sign off here, I do just have to say that we're very fortunate in that the success that we're having in our step up program, I have to be honest, is a reflection of so many of our friends in the industry. There are so
Mm.
many other retailers that have shared their best practices with us. I mean, our friends at Pages Music and Beacock and Meyer and Summer Hayes Music. Probably after you left, we flew our front counter manager out to Summer Hayes Music so we could watch what they were doing out there. And
Huh.
there's so many people in the industry that have shared their little best practices and their tips for success. And I would be missing a tremendous opportunity if I didn't extend my sincerest appreciation to those individuals, because I got to be honest, our success is really just a reflection of all of the ideas that we've stolen and borrowed along the way from other dealers, our friends in the manufacturing industry, and great places like NASMD.
It's one of the best things about the industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you're signed up for NASMD, which we hope you are, we'll see you there. Thanks again, Nick.
Good seeing you, Shane. Thanks for having me.
We hope you found the information in this episode useful and something you can use in your everyday life as an ed rep. If there is a topic you'd like to learn more about and have presented on a future episode of Ed Rep Radio, or you'd like to give us some feedback in general, please email us at edrepradio@eastmanstrings.com. To learn more about Eastman Music Company, go to our website, eastmanmusiccompany.com, or give your Eastman rep a call. Thanks, and drive safe.